Before you can begin winterizing your camper, you need to make sure these switches are off. This is where my water heater and my water pump switches are located. They have to be off, especially the water heater. If you leave your water heater on and your camper is plugged in during the process, you will burn it out very, very quickly. Once you have your hot water heater and your water pump turned off, you're going to want to drain your freshwater holding tank. Typically the drain is located below the tank itself. While the freshwater tank is draining, you're going to want to locate and drain your hot water heater. You'll find that behind an exterior panel, and it will have some method of actually draining the tank. Some trailers could have this on the inside, but most of them will be located in a metal compartment on the outside. This one here happens to have a drain, just like a car radiator, and you're going to want to leave that open and let it drain as much as possible. While your hot water tank is draining, locate the drain ports for the water system. Now, older trailers might not have these. In fact, I suppose it's possible some modern trailers don't. But if you have a typically constructed travel trailer, the water system drains down to a lowest point. And at that lowest point, you'll find usually two either valves, or in this case, plugs. And then when you remove that, that allows all the water in the entire trailer to dribble down to this point. Now, the key to getting the system to work, however, is you have to let water in whenever you let water out. So once you've gotten these loose, you're going to want to go and open each of the sink drains. You're going to want to flush the toilet. You're going to want to turn on your shower. You're going to want to use all available water sources and just leave all the valves open. And that allows the water to suck back down and come out the bottom. When it has stopped draining, put the plugs back in, and now we can start winterizing the system. Now, technically, in a perfect world, allowing the system to gravity drain means there's no water left. But I usually don't trust it. If you have plastic or PEX lines, they're surprisingly forgiving to a little bit of water being left in. But if you've got old copper lines, or where the PEX lines have fittings, there is no forgiveness. And as the water expands, it will burst through the pipes.
I made up this little diagram here, and assume that's the cross-section of a frozen water pipe. Because the ice can't expand through the copper lines, copper is what breaks. The PEX stuff typically has enough give, except at the fittings. If it freezes at the fittings, the valves, those will break. Junctions, unions, 90s, fittings, those are all vulnerable spots, as are the low spots. Last thing you want is a picture of copper pipe on the right there. You don't want that in your camper.
The easiest way to prevent that is to run a little bit of RV safe antifreeze through. And that basically replaces that bubble of untreated water that might be left in a low spot with a mixture of water and antifreeze. So rather than turning into hard ice, at worst, it can turn into slush. And that does prevent the bursting from taking place. Now, if you want, you can dump that RV antifreeze directly into your freshwater holding tanks, and that's fine. The thing is, there's no need for that antifreeze to be in there. Because the freshwater holding tanks have a large volume of empty air once they've been drained, that 3/4 of an inch of water that might remain in the bottom, it's not going to break the tank when it freezes, because it'll just dome up, much like ice cubes in an ice tray.
Here's another one of my snazzy drawings. So yes, the ice will expand horizontally, but it has that large open area, and so the forces will just buckle it up, and it can't push hard enough on the sidewalls of your tank to crack it, unless that tank is, full.
Putting antifreeze in your freshwater holding tank means a lot more work in the spring, a lot more flushing, and a lot more water usage in order to get that taste out. Instead of putting it directly into the tanks, what I do is I pump it directly into the system. Take a look at your camper's water pump and find out what fittings it uses. In this case, mine uses just some simple standard sink hose fittings. And you're going to want to go to the hardware store and make yourself up one of these. And this is merely a union junction where I've gone through a cap so that I can screw directly to the pump a bottle of this fluid, therefore negating any reason to dump a whole lot of unnecessary taste into your drinking water tank. Now, you don't have to get this fancy. You can just go drill a round hole in the cap, cut the end off the hose, and simply stick it through. And that's what I used for many years, is that exact same thing, until I closed it in the door and broke it. I then remade this one to be a little fancier. But that way, rather than contaminating your drinking water with the foul tasting stuff and requiring flushing of a massive 50 to 150 gallon tank, all you gotta do is pump it directly through the system, and when you're done, you just leave it. And that way your water lines are treated, but not your drinking tank. And so now I have this system hooked up there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into the camper after making sure I put those drain plugs back in, otherwise you'll dump the whole thing out the back. And I've got the water heater closed, and I've got basically everything closed up. You'll then flip your pump on, and rather quickly, because it's going to try to dump everything into the hot water tank if you don't have bypass valves, and I don't. You're going to want to open your valves. I typically start with the ones closest and then move to the ones farthest. You don't need to put a whole lot of pink through. Just any color at all is adequate, because remember, in theory, everything's already drained anyways. So you'll watch that bottle start to collapse, and you'll know that the pump has begun to push it through the lines. Pretty straightforward. One of the areas often forgotten is the outside shower, if you have one, because a lot of people don't use it and they don't think about it. You want to make sure that you don't freeze and break this by running a little pink through it as well.
And with that last bit of pink, the pressurized water system is done. But it's only half the job. Literally. You still have the drain lines to do. Now the holding tanks, when you're all done, you'll take the camper, drain those for the winter. So they'll be empty and they don't need any pink in them. But the P-traps under your sink and the P-trap under your shower. The shower is the most vulnerable of the two because it hangs down. Those are not designed to hold any pressure at all. And so even very mild freezing can result in cracking there. And that's really the next step. Before I start that step, however, I'm going to go to the back of the camper, pull those drains, and recover all the antifreeze currently in the lines. Because why not reuse it?
By redraining the rear of the camper and saving that stuff, I always seem to get about half of it back out. And that means that some of it, well, obviously some of it came through the faucets into the sink and traps already. And some of it undoubtedly found its way into the water heater, which is what it's supposed to do. And I'll show you how to double check that that's protected here in a bit. But that right there is perfectly good. By putting it back in a clear bottle like this, I can make sure it doesn't appear to be too diluted. That's fine. That's clearly full strength, because there really wasn't any water left in my lines. For systems like mine that don't have a hot water heater bypass, it always pushes some in there. To check, crack the hot water heater drain valve again, and just see that it comes out pink. And this is clearly coming out pink, so it is just fine. If you have a hot water heater bypass, then bypass it and leave this drain open. And even without the pink stuff, your hot water heater will be just fine. Because even if there's a little bit of water in there, as long as it has that airspace that we talked about when we showed the picture of the freshwater tank freezing, the ice will just dome up just like it does in your ice cube tray. But if it has a little spot where it can escape, like this little extension valve drain system right here, you better believe that bad boy will freeze up solid. Leaving it open, that solves that. Same thing with your freshwater tank drain. Make sure you leave that one open too. Obviously, as you ran the system, you ended up putting a bunch of the pink stuff down it already. And that's kind of, you just sort of have to gauge how much flowed through your sink when you were playing with the valves. Typically they say about a cup at least. So if I figure that I have a half a cup in there, and I know I have at least that, then I'm done. There it is. That is one done drain. As far as the holding tanks themselves go, you're just going to want to go, after you're done winterizing it, mind you, go take the thing out and drain it. And give them a good amount of time to actually drain. Because the last thing you want is gray water, or God forbid, black water, sitting at those valves and then freezing at those valves. It took me, I have 2 more P-traps to do, but it took me 1 bottle. Their camper is 24 feet long. It has 2 sinks, a shower, an outside shower, and a toilet. That's the extent of my plumbing system. And it took me 1 bottle and just a few minutes using my handy dandy pump it directly through. When springtime comes, all I do is I put some fresh water in that holding tank and I turn the pump on and I blow a little fresh water through all the lines. And that way you don't have to deal with the antifreeze taste nearly as long as you would if you had an entire tank to, I don't want to use the term disinfect, but flush out, so to speak. So that's the way I do it. It's always worked for me. We typically see temperatures of -20 or below, so it works. Happy camping.